Great morning, my friends, and welcome to another 10-minute Rise Up with Dragon. As always, we want to just remind everybody and welcome them to the playing field of their consciousness. This podcast's intention is to remove the blindfolds from your programmed mind so that you can gain access to higher levels of consciousness and tap into your true great potential. We do this how? We do this with our 10-minute straight to the punch, deep thought podcast format, weekly blog called The Dragon's Lair, One from the Vault, and our upcoming online courses and books. Welcome, my friends, to another Rise Up with Dragon.
Great morning, world! Welcome to the Rise Up with Dragon podcast with your host, Dragon!
Great morning, friends. And I just want to welcome you to the potential of a new day. Before we jump into today's Rise Up, which is called Accident Prone, I don't know how that sits in your mind. I just want to give great thanks to one of the most amazing women in the world, my wife, the chicken, up here on my wall, and just her amazing podcast that is the sponsor and support system for the Rise Up with Dragon podcast. That's Calm Mind.
Get into the float state with Calm Mind meditations and gear.
So before we jump into it today, and today I think it's going to actually be under 10 minutes, just a couple of what I call dragon thoughts. I want everybody to know that when I wake up in the morning, and I have a system for this, and it'll come in my book, and it's the Rise Up Great Day Morning, system and procedure that helps me get my stuff right for the day. But, I was recognizing on our walk this morning with Chicken, I go for a run, and then after I do that same run as a walk with my wife, we were talking, and I just recognized that, like a lot of people, I wake up in a deep, dark hole most of the time in the morning. Like that's the first thing. If I really, really acknowledge it, when I boot up my computer, I'm in a hole. And, I experience the feelings that are usually, carrying a negative connotation like anxiety, maybe fear, depression, things like that. So I have this moment where I open my eyes, and I go from unconscious to conscious, where I can either take control of that and dictate how the rest of the day is going to go, or make that my reality. Like for instance, this morning, I put my feet on the ground, and the first thing I thought is maybe I need a little bit more sleep, and I justified it, and I started to think, oh, I'll, snuggle with my wife and all that. And then I just said, you know what, I'm going to put my feet on the ground and I'm going to go through my procedure. And I look up and I say, how can I help? And I just move to the next phase where I just have my cup of coffee and I start reading something positive. And just like magic, 20 minutes later, I reach the next level where I start to get this crazy idea that I'm going to go for a 3-mile run. So I just wanted to share that with everybody because when you do become a 3rd-degree black belt in taking control of your life, it doesn't mean that you don't face the same adversities and struggle. It just means you recognize how to handle them with grace. And that's the idea of building a strong interface response system. So one of the thoughts that I had this morning, once I got my shit together, was I read this and I just thought this was powerful. See, this is the kind of thing you might want to write down and read it again, just because it'll make more sense. And if you can grab this for the day, I have a feeling you're going to be able to utilize it to your advantage. So here's what it says. It says, we are free to think, and there lies our biggest challenge. Think about that for a second. The biggest challenge that we have is our minds and the way we think. Now, why is that a challenge? It's because our minds have been programmed by yesterday, by our mother, father, teacher, preacher, and society, and just anything that you've heard even 5 minutes ago. When you start thinking, you're using this Intel processor that's been controlled and, by your inherited, reality that creates this perception. So if you look at any of the masters, what they're doing is trying to teach you how to stop thinking, right? So our greatest challenge is that we're free to think. Some people call this free will. And it's like I've had the opportunity to be speaking to a lot of people lately. I'm in a process of looking for some new partners. In this cycle, I'm going to take about 5, 10 new partners with me and help them, like I've helped everybody else, create this life of freedom. And I have the opportunity to see what it's like to talk to people that are thinking a lot, and all you got to do is make sure that if you're thinking in the wrong direction and it's not actually in support of what you're doing, you're never going to get anywhere. Once you take your thinking and you put it in the right direction, we're always going to think. Then all of a sudden you start moving forward. So it's just so fascinating. I'm so fascinated with human behavior. I love all of you. The crazy ones, I actually love the crazy ones, and the quiet ones, and the perfect ones, everything. I just love every one of you. So let's talk about accident prone. So I know what you're thinking when I say accident prone. Your programmed knee-jerk response is probably, either you do or do not want to be accident prone, or you'll say, I am or I'm not accident prone. But when you use the word accident, it's like, who wants to get in an accident? So we're going to rewire that here today. So experiencing accidents has somehow developed a negative connotation. And I think that we'd all agree that to be true. When I get that, I could get caught up in thinking that that's a bad thing any day. So this is the Rise Up with Dragon podcast. And this is the whole idea of removing the blindfolds. A blindfold is something that you've been programmed to see, right? So a blindfold or a blind spot is protecting you from seeing something else, the dark side of the moon. Maybe it's not dark, right? Maybe it's dark because you've never seen it before. So this is the Rise Up with Dragon podcast, and we like to look at the other side of the normal programmed herd-like thinking. So we take a concept, or we take the concept of uncomfortable growth, which we all know about and we've read about. Take a concept like of uncomfortable growth and seek to bypass our programmed analytical mind and write a new program around it, right? You can actually reprogram your analytical mind so you have a different way of processing things. I've been talking to some of you lately and recognize that my regular listeners, and there's a lot of you, are pretty deep thinkers and analytical. So, I would assume that this podcast is kind of like developing a little bit of a niche. And I'm just in awe of some of the ideas that you guys feed me and inspire me. So have you ever accidentally walked into something good, right? Did you accidentally happen upon this podcast and find it something useful for yourself? That's what this is about. Have you ever accidentally walked into something good? Whether you think success and happiness is only a pot of gold on the other side of your intentional and focused rainbow or not, I'm here to remove the blindfolds, but also challenge you that everything is accidental in some way. What's fascinating and exciting about pops of awareness and increased levels of consciousness, and I shared this in another podcast, is that it can happen in an instant, and for the most part by accident. Isn't it interesting to look at everything that you're trying to accomplish right now and recognize that it never really comes from here? It never comes from where you're going. It usually comes from here, right? It comes from the 90-degree angle. It comes just out of nowhere. I think that, you can leverage that into existence by practicing some of the things that we talk about. But for the most part, everything comes by accident. So meaning you somehow let go of controlling your thoughts and allow yourself to just receive a message, right? If you think like this and you understand it happens by accident, just let go of all of this problem of thinking and just allow yourself to receive a message or an insight or a clue from what I perceive as an abundant universe and experience what I call a snap. Now, I have a whole chapter on that in my book, but the concept of a snap is poof, accidental clarity, and all of a sudden you level up. It's like, what was that commercial with the tomato juice? I should have had a V8, right? It's like all of a sudden you just go, wow, that happened. Like, that's typically not intentional. I will say that the work that I do in self-discovery and consciousness and the interface response system, in my book that's coming out, what it does is I think it merely places you in the arena of play, intentionally places you in the arena of play consciously, where this awakening, this concept, this accidental awareness is the focus of your conversation, and it pushes the conversation. It leverages it a little bit more, but at the end of the day, it's still accident. So what's interesting about that is if you're practicing personal growth and self-discovery, I think what you're doing is leveraging the chances of an accidental breakthrough. I met my wife by accident. Most of the things, I created this podcast by accident. It wasn't about that. It was about me trying to get through anxiety problems and practicing by doing it live and creating a podcast. And then poof, all of a sudden I'm the dragon. So this idea that at any moment you can accidentally bump into a full-on awakening and realization that will end your suffering, perhaps, and that's a concept as well, and get you back on track. If you want to leverage that, into existence, just simply recognize that your struggle comes from your programmed limited mind. And most of the time you trying to control uncontrollable things, but it comes from your programmed limited mind. And learn how to slow it down. Slow down your program. Just slow it down so that you can step into what I call the eye of the storm and be open to messages and potentially acquire what the Buddhist would call the golden key to consciousness. That exists in the eye of the storm. If you slow the process down and you become open to things like this rather than closed, you might get those messages that are actually being sent to you all the time by an abundant universe that is actually in full favor of you having an amazing experience in this life. Love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day and looking forward to the next one. As a quick reminder, we have this other podcast that I do with my buddy Mark Savant called NFTs Made Simple. There is a massive, massive shift going on with money. You're going to very, very soon see that our kids are going to bypass even using banks. And there's things like crypto and all that stuff going on. So we have a podcast that helps you make it simple. So that's called NFTs Made Simple. Go check us out, rate us, review us. And as always, love and appreciate you all for subscribing, using our podcast as part of your morning structure and sharing it with your friends. Always appreciate the ratings and reviews. It makes us important. Love and appreciate you. Have an amazing day.